This was Chapter 56, Section 3? No, Section 2, Anti-Communism Guides Reagan's Foreign Policy. Reagan had very strong views about the dangers of communism and believed that the Soviet Union posed an ongoing threat to freedom and democracy. In a speech in March of 1983, he described the Soviet Union as the evil empire, and though Reagan's tough talk pleased conservatives, it alarmed other Americans who feared that the tensions of the Cold War would increase. To counter the Soviet threat and undermine communism, Reagan increased defense spending, and the result was the largest peacetime military buildup in United States history. In that same year, Reagan announced plans for a new arms program, the Strategic Defense Initiative. This would create a quote-unquote missile shield designed to protect the United States from nuclear attack. It would include land-based and space-based weapons, which would in theory knock down any incoming missiles and deter war by making nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. To further undermine communism, Reagan decided to openly support anti-communism worldwide. This policy was called the Reagan Doctrine. The purpose of the Reagan Doctrine was to allow the United States to provide aid to rebels fighting Soviet-based governments. Asia, Africa, and Latin America were some of the few places where the United States provided military and economic aid. Central America was the first place that the Reagan Doctrine was applied. In Nicaragua, leftist rebels known as Sandinistas had overthrown the country's dictator, Anastasio Somoza, in 1979. The Sandinista government then acquired Soviet arms and forged close ties with communist Cuba. Reagan saw these events, along with the growing insurgency in El Salvador, as evidence of the Cuban and Soviet effort to spread communism in Central America and throughout the Western Hemisphere. In the early 80s, the Reagan administration began funding covert operations to overthrow the Sandinista government. U.S. advisors armed and trained over 10,000 Nicaraguan rebels. This U.S.-backed force, known as the Contras, attacked the Sandinistas from bases in neighboring countries. Congress questioned Reagan policy. In 1994, lawmakers learned that the CIA had been illegally planting mines in Nicaraguan harbors. They banned further U.S. military aid to the Contras. However, covert operations continued and would later embroil Reagan in its most serious scandal. Meanwhile, the administration was also providing economic and military aid to El Salvador, which was battling its own leftist rebellion. Reagan argued that the aid would counter communist influence and support the country's struggling democratic government. But most U.S. aid went to the Salvadorian military, which compiled a brutal human rights record. The Civil War lasted 12 years and left over 70,000 Salvadorans dead before it ended in 1992. The Reagan Doctrine also led to the United States invading the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada. In 1983, a military coup brought a communist leader to power in Grenada. He invited Cuban workers to the island and signed military agreements with several communist countries. Reagan became alarmed and sent an invasion force of U.S. Marines to Grenada to oust the regime, expel the Cubans, and install a new government. The people of Grenada and nearby islands supported the United States invasion, but many countries around the world condemned the action as unlawful and illegal interference in other nations' affairs.